Well, what's up, everybody? Welcome to The Frame. We take current events, cultural phenomena, and other topics and look at them through a biblical frame of mind. My name's Jacob. I'll be your host for tonight. I have a feeling we're in for some crazy discussion, so let's get to it. Well, welcome in. We're glad you're joining us. If it's your first time here, I just want to take a second and introduce our other hosts for tonight. You've got two of us. You've got me, Jacob, and here's our other host, Tyler. Tyler, how you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing great. Feeling good. Ready to talk politics, everyone's favorite subject.
Oh, yeah. We'll be talking about the election specifically. Tyler, actually, I'm going to let you tell everybody specifically like what we're
Yeah,
talking about in terms of the election tonight.
of course. So keep in mind, I'm independent, very independent, but I
Same.
want to highlight why Kamala lost the election and why Democrats, well, for the time being, have lost the nation.
Mm.
Kind of go over the strategies that they've employed over the last several years from a political standpoint and how people are responding, and kind of give a Christian perspective as well on of that commentary, kind of see if we can dig into where are they falling short, how do we feel about their strategies as Christians, and what we think they could do to do better, what we're excited about, what we're not excited about. I kind of want to get into all of it. So
That sounds awesome. Let's do it. So I think probably a good place to start. So obviously
mhm.
we're 2 days after the election, but even so, there's still some votes being counted for different seats, like in the House of Representatives and stuff. So we don't know whether that's going red or blue yet. Um, but let's go over some stats and stuff. I know we've looked up a few things that were just intriguing about this election, things that stood out about this election compared to the last election. What are some things that stood out to you about this election specifically?
Yeah. So, possibly the most striking thing I have heard about this election, and this was during a CNN live coverage throughout the election night as the votes were coming in. This was like right around the time where they had declared Trump was the winner. And they were saying that at the time, exit polls were showing 2/3 of voters who had declared that they disliked both candidates had voted for Trump,
Wow,
which signals to me
that's a
that
lot.
despite people, not liking Trump, they preferred Trump's policies to Kamala's policies. Um, Now, granted, I think if we dive into that a little bit more, we could also argue that a lot of people didn't really know what Kamala's policies were. Infamously, she did go on The View, and when asked, what she would do differently from, her time in the Biden administration, she's like, can't think of anything. That doesn't look good when you've got a nation of people who are like, my wallet hurts right now. I'm concerned about food prices. I'm concerned about the cost of living and housing and the
Yeah.
cost of gas prices every couple of months. That does not sound good. And so, overwhelmingly, the nation, and specifically that large chunk of voters who said, I don't like either of these people, they decided, hey, I want to go with the guy who wants to change some things. And I think that's why she lost. I think that's the biggest part of it in my mind, is there was a candidate who was promising to try and do things differently, and there was another candidate who was like, I think we're doing okay, and we can't let the other guy in office.
Yeah.
So to me, that was the most striking thing out of election night, as far as like potential reasons why Kamala lost.
Yeah, totally. Like you're mentioning, as far as like her campaign strategy, that was something that really stood out to me too. Was I was just like throughout the whole campaign, I'm like, I don't know what she really stands for,
Mhm.
except for like on like a couple very specific things. Um,
Yeah,
like
mostly social issues.
Yeah, mostly social issues, specifically when we're talking about things like um, LGBTQ stuff, or if we're talking about like pro life versus pro choice. Like that's the kind of stuff that she seemed to really kind of anything that she was actually speaking out as far as this is what I'm for, this is what I'm against.
Mm,
That was like 90% of it. It felt like it didn't really seem like there was really anything else that she specifically dove into to really talk about. And so it was almost as if she was trying to build an entire platform just solely off of those issues, thinking that, well, if I get people on my side on these, if I cater to who I think the majority of the population is going to be just on these issues, this will be enough.
yeah, I think, and potentially this is a bad label for the Democrats as a whole, but right now they are the party of emotion, where they're
Mhm.
really trying to appeal to the emotions of everyday Americans, which I can understand on one aspect. Like there are absolutely situations where, so take 9/11 for example, the country was hurting bad after
Yeah.
that, and we saw people sign up in droves to go and fight in Iraq. Obviously, feelings changed about that later, but at the time, we were like just shell shocked, and an emotional response was, welcomed in the country. But I think over the last 4, 8, possibly 12 years, a lot of the Democratic strategy has been appealing to social issues and emotion. And I think this election signifies that America's just kind of tired of that. They feel like they've been pandered to. Like the Democrats are, on a soapbox for things that they don't necessarily care as much about right now. As we've already mentioned, the economy, as with essentially every election, is once again like the most important figure. And in those exit polls, that was once again the top priority for most voters.
Yeah.
And so, like, I think that emotional appeal just falls flat.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think also a lot of people, um, uh, frankly, okay, so I'm gonna try to make sure I refrain from any specific terminology that might get a
Mm,
shadow banned. But so for me as as someone who looks to the Bible for my moral compass, personally, I believe that the pro-choice side of things is unaliving infants, that unaliving humans. And I think the biggest disagreement for most of the country comes around whether or not a fetus is in fact a human being or not, and whether or not it has the rights of a human being. And I'm saying it because to try to keep it um, relatively generic here. Um, but it is interesting that there are still like turtle eggs have have more protection and more rights than human fetuses. Um, but I think for the most part, I think w- most of the country that are pro-choice are okay with where things are with that. Like, yeah, I mean, they're always like pushing for more and everything, but I don't. There's not like actually like there are some states where they have made it illegal after a certain point, or unless you meet very specific criteria. Um, and so there's an aspect where like, yeah, I could see a lot of people wanting to make that a significant part of why they vote for who they vote for. But also, like you're saying, a lot of those people also are sitting there going, I'm having to choose between filling my gas tank and putting groceries on the table for the kids that I have. And so,
mhm.
regardless of whether of how they feel about those issues, right now, the pressing matter is, hey, how do I make sure that I'm providing for my family? How do I make sure that I'm providing for my kids? How do I make sure that when my kids grow up, they're not immediately just completely on their own or having to live at home because of the fact that they can't afford to pay rent, and so they're living at home until they're 40 years old. I mean, we millennials kind of started off with that stereotype of the kid living in their parents' basement until they're 30. Um, but like now today, like that is becoming more the norm, and it's not unacceptable anymore because people actually understand that the economy is terrible. And so, like you're saying,
Yeah.
like as much as a lot of people care about those issues, right now they care more about issues like the economy, foreign policy, because they're seeing how things have just frankly kind of gone to crap over the last 4 years in both of those areas. I mean, let's just take a look. 4 years ago, um, I know for me personally, 4 years ago, like I had a budget, but I wasn't actually at any point where I was like, hey, I need to wait until next week to buy gas. I need to wait until my next paycheck to buy gas, kind of a thing. I was never at that point. Right now, there have been a couple times over the last couple months where I'm sitting there going, all right, I'm going to see how long my car will go on empty, because I'm
Yeah.
because I'm just like, hey, if I go and I fill my gas tank, or I'll go and I'll get like 1 or 2 gallons. Because if I get more than that, well, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to go and get
Mhm.
groceries. And so, um, for that's for the economy, and then for foreign policy. 4 years ago, we had a president who had stepped foot in North Korea for the first time ever.
Yeah.
That's where we left 4 years ago, and now there are two major wars still happening
Mhm.
that we're basically just kind of standing on the sidelines. Like, yeah, we're supplying things, we're giving stuff to one side versus the other, but aside from that, we're not actually like doing anything to protect our national interests in those countries, and we're letting those wars continue, and we're letting these foreign leaders who are instigating these things, we're letting them tell us, hey, you need to make sure that you don't get involved in this more than you already are, otherwise there's going to be problems for you. And we're like, okay, well then we need to make sure that we stay where we're at.
Yeah. So I think like when it comes to the foreign policy thing, first of all, Trump had a really good campaign platform to run on in terms of foreign policy because he could tout like, "Hey, no new wars during my administration." And then, like you said, now we've got two major wars that are going on
Yep.
with Israel and Hamas, Palestine, and um, Ukraine and Russia. And so, with us constantly giving money to one side in each of those wars, I think a lot of Americans are just frustrated because they're like, "Look, I'm struggling, at the pump and in the grocery store and trying to buy a house, and we're sending over so much money to these nations." Granted, I think most of us understand that we fall on one side or the other, and we're like, "Hey, I can understand the the hurt and the pain and all of that that's going on abroad, but like we have issues at home right now. Like our kitchen's on fire."
Yeah.
I think that's how a lot of people feel. Um, I know, especially after Hurricane Helene came through, a lot of Americans were, pretty furious with the amount of foreign aid that we had going out when we had all of this domestic trouble here. And I will caveat and say that I dug into it a little bit more recently, that a lot of our foreign aid, like to Ukraine, is essentially a dated military equipment that we
Hmm.
are not really, I guess, in a way, gifting to Ukraine, and we are reinvesting a lot of that aid, a significant portion of that aid money back into our replenishing our military stores. So it's not like the billions and billions of dollars are just getting sent straight over to Ukraine, but it is still a situation where it's like we are spending obscene amounts of money, um, that's getting justified by a war. So either way, it
Yeah.
doesn't look good. And when you have one party that's like, "Hey, we don't want any more wars. We're campaigning on, putting an end to these and, not trying to intervene as much." And you have another one that says like, "No, this is like a holy righteous fight that we need to be involved in." And yet people at home are still suffering, it just doesn't sound good. It really doesn't work for the average everyday American. Now, of course, you're going to have people that are entrenched in their political beliefs on the left and the right, and so they're going to eat up, whatever the party platform is shooting out. But for most of what we would call the swing voters, the independent voters, like it just doesn't work. Like people are more concerned with what's going on here at home.
Yeah. How much do you think it hurt Kamala's campaign that I think it was within the last week um it came out, a bunch of different outlets, news outlets were reporting on this, that Kamala was running different ads, different TV ads, in different states, specifically in regards to foreign policy. And in one state where it had a more Muslim population, the ad was much more in favor of talking about like the Gaza Strip and ending horrendous atrocities and things like that. But then in
Hmm.
the other state where there was a higher Jewish population, she was talking about, hey, I stand by Israel and their right and claim to the land that's theirs, and ending the terrorism that's occurring by Hamas. How much do you think that coming out like within a week of the election hurt her campaign in this area? And are there any things that we can look at that show like, hey, like, yeah, like this would have been expected to be the case, but this ended up happening?
Truthfully, I don't know. It's hard to say because it came out so quickly. Like, I didn't hear about that until the day before the election.
Mm.
Granted, that did not change anything for me about how I felt about either of the candidates. To me, it was just kind of like, oh, shocker. Like, you know, not surprised. But I could absolutely see how, any Palestinians in the US, any Jews in the US could have heard that and been like, "That's it. That's the straw that breaks the camel's back for me. Like,
Mm.
I'm not voting for Harris." So, I mean, it's absolutely like a damning thing to have come out the week of the election. I just don't know how big of an impact it had because of the timing of it all. Had this happened a month ago, I think it would have been potentially huge.
Mm.
But it's honestly hard to say.
Yeah. The thing that kept on going through my head, my wife's a musical theater, like massive. She loves musical theater. And like I have an appreciation for it and stuff, but there's this musical Hamilton, and there's there's this character. Obviously all this is based on true things. There's a guy, Aaron Burr, and Alexander Hamilton are sort of kind of frenemies throughout this whole thing. And he looks at him at one point, he's like, if you stand for nothing, what'll you fall for? And then later on, Aaron Burr is running against Thomas Jefferson for president, and Hamilton and Jefferson had like completely disagreed on just about everything, but he
Mhm.
still endorsed Jefferson when asked about it. And when confronted, he said, well, it's because Jefferson has beliefs and Aaron Burr doesn't have any. And so if you get Aaron Burr, I don't know what we're going to get, but at least I know what we're going to get if Jefferson's in office. And I know
Yeah.
what we would need to do. And that's kind of like, as soon as that came out, that's immediately what I started thinking through. Is I'm like, oh my gosh, she's literally like the modern day Aaron Burr.
Yeah. I think like in my mind, if I had to really paint broad strokes as far as like the effects of the entire political landscape over the last 4 years, and specifically all of that like coming to fruition in this election, is that the Democrats like just fundamentally misread the room with the American population and the issues they care about. Um, Again, Kamala had like what 100 days to campaign.
Yeah, I think so.
So, absolutely, the Democratic Party was, in her ear saying like, "Hey, these are the things we need to campaign on. These are, what we're going to platform with or going to push through our platform." And I only say it that way because like she was going to need help with like
Oh,
100 days
absolutely.
to go. This was absolutely like going to be some sort of coordinated effort to try and win the election, and you just can't do that in 100 days without serious help.
Yeah.
And the Democratic strategy just, again, it fell flat because they did not understand how Americans truly felt. They've hitched their wagon to, very fringe issues, like, socially, and tried to kind of campaign on that. And I think this election was just kind of a rejection of that and saying, like, hey, like, we get it. We know what you stand for, but you trying to make us care about that when, we care about XYZ is just not working. And I don't know that I've ever seen this bad of a misreading
Mm,
of the population. So one interesting stat that came from MSN as proof of this: 91%. The percentage of counties with at least 90% of their votes counted already shifted toward Trump from the 2020 election.
dang.
Like 91% of counties
Wow.
shifted toward Trump. And you have to ask, like, why? And I think, as you mentioned, people knew what they were getting with Trump. They didn't know what they were getting with Kamala, but also just the messaging and the political climate over the last 4 years from the Democratic Party. Um, largely abandoning the working class, going, so strongly after these social issues and after these, minority kind of fringe uh, issues, I guess. It's not resonating with people and what they want to hear from their presidential candidate. So when you take, for example, the last 4 years, how we've watched Biden in the White House during his speeches, and when you gaslight the American people for 4 years and say, like, hey, there's nothing mentally wrong with this guy,
Yeah.
and it's just like, do you think we're stupid? Like, I think that's the way a lot of Americans felt
Yeah,
about
seriously.
those sort of actions. It's like, hey, and then you're telling us the economy is great, but I don't see that in the grocery store. I see, interest rates that are at, 7, 8%.
Yeah.
And it's just infeasible to consider purchasing a house or having a kid right now. And yet your White House press secretary is saying, like, Joe Biden's, like, as fit as he's ever been, and we have the strongest economy to date. And it's just like, what are you trying to sell me? And
Right.
it doesn't work for most people, you
I
know?
was mentioning to someone, I think just like yesterday or day before, I went to the store and I was gonna get some soup cans, and I remember, okay, this is before COVID at least. Um,
Mhm.
Cans of Campbell's soup. No, this is not product placement. Campbell's soup cans, like the small, like 10.5 ounce condensed that you put in a pot and then you fill the can with water and you add a whole can of water to it, used to be like 98 cents a can.
Mhm. I
And I
remember
went
those
there
days.
because I'm like, hey, we hadn't bought soup in a while. I was going to buy some soup. We normally make it from scratch, and I'm like, it's $1.99 a can. Like, I get,
Yeah.
like, on the one hand, like, okay, that's still really cheap, but that's literally double.
Mhm.
And they're saying that inflation's at like what, like 20 or 30 something, like in terms of the economy, and how much more expensive things are. They're trying to claim that overall it's only like 20 or 30% over the last 4 years. And I'm like, so if it's only 20 or 30%, why is stuff literally double or more than double the price? And
Yeah.
what categories are you including in your calculations to bring that average so far down that most people aren't actually utilizing? Like, maybe some people are utilizing those categories, but the ones that people care about, housing, gas, cars, and groceries, like, those are astronomically through the roof.
Yeah. I've always measured in, like, real inflation by how much am I spending to, like, fill up a box at Aldi. And so, you know, when I go and I'm just like, okay, I need groceries for the week, I fill up a box, and it used to be like 22, $25, and now it's like 40, maybe
I
40
remember going to
plus.
Sam's
I'm
and
just like,
literally
ugh.
filling a cart to the point where I was having to like I had already filled the bottom.
Yeah.
I was putting stuff in the cart and like having to like not balance necessarily, but like I'm stacking stuff on top and I'm like having to
Yeah.
make sure I drive carefully to make sure that it doesn't go sliding off the edge of the cart. And it was like maybe like 250, 275, maybe $300 if I had actually like gone
Mhm.
for some of the things that weren't like core items that our family needed. And now like we just went to Sam's last week and I think our cart was maybe half full and it was 280 ish,
Yeah.
give or take. And I was like, holy crap, like that's how much it used to be for me to literally fill my car with
Mhm.
groceries. And now I'm not having to play Tetris at all. Like I can still see out of my rearview mirror when I put that load in the car, which I still just find mind boggling.
Yeah.
So
And so
how much do you think over the last 4 years, or how much do you think this election is an indicator of what people would call like the silent majority versus like the squeaky wheel that it isn't reflective of the whole population, but they speak up
Mhm.
louder than everyone else, but the silent majority still prevails? How much do you think this election is a squeaky wheel versus silent majority versus the squeaky wheel changed their mind?
I mean, it's kinda hard to say. I think the, like, shy Trump voter thing is, very real. There's especially with the media, um, there was a very condescending attitude from the left toward anybody who, supported, like, conservative values, or even from what I've heard from a lot of my Democrat friends that were not as liberal as them. It's it's just kind of like they're eating each other alive, and as much as they talk about, like not letting hate win and all of that stuff, and I get where they get those talking points from, they very much, I think, regurgitate that same level of hatred. It's just directed in different ways at different people. Um, like young men in this country, I know, have felt abandoned. A lot of the working class has felt abandoned, ostracized, and again, it's largely because of the condescending attitude. Where like, if you don't agree with us on this subject, you must be either a misogynist or a racist, um,
Hmm.
or a fascist, and that's not how you get votes. Like,
Yeah.
by trying to demean people into coming over to your camp. Like, if you want people to come to your side, you say like, "Hey, these are the ideas we believe in. This is our plan for the future. This is why we're excited about it, and this is why we think it'll work."
Mm-hmm.
And that's largely the way that you win. Now, granted, on the flip side of that, I fully understand, like, one of Trump's, like, you know, announcement calls, like, just a hallmark of his campaign is, speaking out against illegal immigration and talking
Yeah.
about like the horrors of a lot of the criminals that have made it through the border, and what they've been able to wreak havoc on in certain areas of the country. And so, like, I also fully admit that that's going on, but there was also some other substance in other areas. I feel like the Democrats, they could have gotten away with a lot of their stuff had they also had more substance on their side. A large part of what they did was, again, to just, they were harping on, like, we can't let Trump back into office.
Hmm.
This will be the end of democracy. It was a very, very, like, negative campaign in the sense of it was solely focusing on issues without providing solutions.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Trump, yes, constantly harping on issues, but also at least talked a lot about solutions and like how he was going to address them. And I think you have to be able to do that if you're bringing up issues. Like, it's not a bad thing to point out negatives, but if you do a negative without a solution coupled with it, all you're doing is complaining,
Yeah.
and ostracizing people.
Exactly. Yeah, I feel like the majority of the Democratic campaign this time around was kind of a, hey, vote for Kamala. At least she's not Trump. Like, I feel
Yeah.
like that was kind of like what could have been their slogan the whole time.
hmm I want to get into some more of these stats.
Yeah,
The average shift toward Trump in urban core counties was 8.1 points. So this is your like New York City, your LA, Sacramento, Houston, the counties in those areas shifted 8.1 points
that's
toward
major.
Trump. Yeah.
Real
I
quick,
mean, that's
take a second. Explain for everybody what that means, like in terms of what it means for somebody for points. How does the point system work with
oh
elections and
Lord.
politics?
You might actually know this one better than I would. Admittedly, I would have to look that one up to get the exact definition.
I
Um,
know it has something to do with. I know it's somewhat related to percentages. I don't
mhm.
remember like exactly it's the same kind of thing. Like I don't remember the exact thing that what like how they determine a point, whether how much it's correlated with percentages versus other things. Because I'm sure part of that is kind of like we have the electoral college, and so
Mhm.
like someone could lose the popular vote but win the electoral college. I would assume the point system probably has a similar thing involved in that takes into account the actual like this number of votes, this number of people, but also taking into account like the concentration of people and things like that as well. I don't know exactly, but I do know that 8 points is insane. Like they
Yeah.
were talking at one point, one of the states, as I was watching the election come out, one of the states only had, I think, 51 or 52% of their votes counted
Mhm.
so far. But Trump had a 14 point something, like 14.8 point lead. And so the Associated Press called the state with literally half the votes counted because they were like, it's a 14 point lead. She's not coming back
Yeah.
from that. It's
Mhm.
statistically near impossible for her to actually for the rest of that state to completely just demolish that 14 point lead.
Mhm. Yeah, I so in general, I know like when we're talking polls, anything that's within like half a point is considered this is kind of a toss up race. This is extremely close. 1 point is like, okay, we can lean and confidently say like, hey, I think they'll win this race. When you get into 5 points and more, that's where it's like, okay, they're absolutely without a doubt like, winning this election. But gosh, I wish uh it's
Hey,
it's
producer
been a
Kevin,
while
if
since
you
I
I'm
yeah.
sorry to if you're able to find something that's helpful with this, that'd be great. No pressure. Um, if you have something, I don't have any articles on this. I don't know where I would find it, but if you've got something that would be helpful, that'd be great. Um, but yeah, let's dive deeper into that. So
Mhm.
in and give us that statistic again. I know you said it was 8 points,
Mhm.
but what did that have to do with again in terms of what areas did
So
he?
that was urban counties, like urban core counties, shifted 8.1 points toward Trump this
Wow.
election.
And that's the major
Um,
counties. That's the major
yeah.
urban centers that you were saying, like Los Angeles, New
Mhm.
York, like places like that.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Because those are all the places that generally vote blue.
Mhm.
Like
Yeah.
I remember
It's
seeing the Georgia map, and I was looking at it, I'm like 98% of the Georgia County map is red, but it's still actually pretty close in terms of the actual count because the counties that were voting blue had such densely populated areas.
yeah, there's the adage that is more often spouted on the conservative side that like there are no like democratic states, there are democratic cities. And largely that holds true. Like when you look at population maps of the US in general, almost overwhelmingly counties are conservative. But then when you get into large metropolitan areas like LA, like Houston, like Dallas, Fort Worth, that's where you get all of your democratic, like political mindsets. And so I've theorized, this is not like something that I read in a book. This is just kind of casual observation. I think why that is because when you have large groups of people that are very diverse, consider, how cities happen in the first place. Somebody moves from somewhere else to come join this city for jobs, like 9 times out of 10. That's the reason. Um, they're coming somewhere for work, moving to the city, and you get these large urban populations that become very diverse. You're running into different kinds of people, and you start to hear about, what are their values, what are they concerned with, what are their pain points. And I think from a human perspective, that's a good thing, because then you get to learn about, how people are different, and what matters to them. But when it comes to running a country, I would argue that this is not necessarily a good thing, because like when your country doesn't have a shared value set that's like very similar, it
Mhm.
becomes very hard to not get polarized, to not splay off in all kinds of different directions, and to get anything done like politically. It becomes very difficult to have a coordinated effort to move towards a specific goal,
Mhm.
because you have shared values that kind of disintegrate, if you will, because everybody's so different. Again, like diversity is a great thing, amongst people and amongst friend sets and all of that. But when you're trying to run a country, it makes it really difficult. Um, so, for example, you take Japan, they're a very homogenous nation, and I'm sure they have political debates, and just like we do, but largely there's a sentiment that most Japanese are, cut from the same cloth in terms of like the values that they
Mhm.
have and that they share. Um, they're pretty similar people, and therefore it's kind of easier to work through those sorts of things. Whereas here we have something that's never really been done before, in terms of a nation, at least not to this scale, where we have just large quantities of different people groups that are all coming from different backgrounds, have different values, have different pain points in their life, and trying to make all of that work is hard.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, but it is a difficult thing for sure. And so when we're looking to cities and you get that exposure with these very diverse groups of people, I think that's where, the emotional side of humans kind of, we rub off on each other. And I think that's why people tend to lean more democratic, in cities, is because you just get steeped in diversity,
Mm.
and the values of other people start to rub off, and you're like, oh, I think I see that and I care about that. And that's just kind of been my casual perception. Again, that's not a scholarly observation by any means, but I think, whereas, contrasting like in rural areas, you have, where most of your friends are farmers, or they work in manufacturing, 9 out of 10 of you are going to agree with what the common sense approach is to, run things.
Yeah. I do find that interesting that generally speaking, the Republican Party seems to be the more common sense party. Would you
Hmm.
would you agree with that? And why do you like why is that?
Um, Again, I think it's because the Democratic Party appeals more to emotion,
Mm.
um, and the Republican Party does not. um, Now, granted, when you talk about, like, what's common sense, I think people from both aisles of the political spectrum are going to disagree on what is common sense. But If we're looking at it strictly from the standpoint of like, we're removing emotion from the equation for the most part and trying to think of like, practical versus emotional, then for sure that's more of
Mm.
the conservative side, and the Republican Party specifically. Um, I can't really say why. Other than other than that's just the way the platforms have kind of built themselves out.
Mm.
As far as like how they campaign, and again, the Democrats, for the last 8 to 12 years, have very solidly built their campaign on appealing to emotional issues.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. So producer Kev just got us a stat here. So a
Sorry, I was waiting to
point.
cut in.
Oh,
A
yeah, go ahead.
point
Go ahead,
is
producer Kev.
an increase. I lost everything I was going to say. Basically, a increase of 8 points is not an increase of 8% in the sense of 8% of the number it was, but in 8% of the numeral value. So going from 50% to 58%.
Okay, and that's generally that's a difference between the two candidates, right? So like let's say it's out of 100%, let's say 10% are undecided or go into,
Mhm.
or for other people 50% is one candidate and 40% is the other primary candidate. That would theoretically be a 10-point lead, right?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
so the
Thank you.
average yeah, so the average shift in urban core counties, 8 points toward Trump. So, for example, we could say Houston went like 60% like Democrat, just as an example, in the
Mm,
last election. That would mean that this election it was 52% Democrat. So an 8 percentage point swing toward Trump.
that's a
Is that what we're
lot.
getting at, Kevin?
Yes.
Okay.
That's a lot of
All right.
people.
Here's another fun stat. This one, again, I have a lot of liberal friends. So my my political leanings, I'm independent. I have conservative values, but I'm very moderate in terms of policy implementation,
Yep.
and I even lean libertarian in a lot of issues. Um, but one of the more telling things to me about like why this election went the way it went was a number of my Democrat friends were honestly shocked and couldn't understand how 46% of Latinos voted for Trump, because they're like, but the deportations and the rhetoric toward immigrants, and like I have a friend who's Dominican, and he and I have talked a lot about some of these issues, and what I would say most white people do not understand about the Hispanic community is that a lot of them are very much in favor of legal immigration.
Hmm.
Um, they're not all illegals. Like most of them are here legally. And so when you talk about like, hey, you should come here legally and pay taxes, um, at least my finger that's been on the pulse in those communities is like, yeah, that's what I did, or that's what my parents did. Like they should do the same thing. Um, and so like again, I think it was really telling how much of the Democrat camp was just kind of shocked that Trump had won 46% of the Hispanic vote.
Yeah,
Um,
I actually so I'm part of a group here in Central Florida we're a worship group where we are a bunch of worship leaders from a bunch of different churches that get together every month, every couple months, to put on a community worship night, just locally for whoever wants to come, because we realized a couple years ago we're like, hey, like a lot of the church, um, is like at competition with each other, but we're all on the same team. We shouldn't be in competition. So like let's create an environment where it's okay for us all to actually get together and be the church, but then actually go back to our home churches on Sunday, kind of a thing. I bring that up because the majority of the group, significant majority of the group, is not white. It is not at all a Caucasian group. I am very much a minority in this group. But even with that, I have a lot of Hispanic friends in the group, and just like you said, they are almost all very much in the sense of like, hey, you know what? Like my parents or my grandparents, most of them, it's grandparents. There are very few that are further back than that. They're looking at this going, we had to work to get in. We had to do this stuff in order to get our place here and cement ourselves in this society, and like we earned this. But all these people are getting to come in and get free lodging and get zero interest loans on homes and get free groceries and this and that and the other thing because of the tax dollars that I'm paying now. Why are we even doing this? And so they're actually feeling like they're getting the short end of the stick a lot of the times with when it comes to immigration policy. If immigration policy is trying to be relaxed, because of the fact that they're saying like, hey, we had to work for this, so why are they getting a free pass? Why don't they have to work for it? And I think also at the same time though, kind of like what you were saying, there's this moderate middle where I tend to also fall. I'm also an independent, definitely more conservative. However, I'm one of those people where I'm like, hey, you know what? Like, yes, I think we need better border security. I think we need better things in place to solidify our borders, to solidify immigration. But also at the same time, we're kind of failing at the same time with legal immigration because it takes way too long. Like if somebody wants to come in, or if they're running away from a bad situation, we need to do better as a country in terms of providing that sanctuary for those who need it, and also making it so that way somebody doesn't have to take 5 years or 2 years to gain citizenship if they meet all the criteria. If they're able to do the stuff and like meet the thing and pass the citizenship test, like why does it need to take that long? So I'm kind of one of those people where I'm like, I think both sides are extremes. I think I don't agree with relaxing immigration in terms of the border. I think we need better border security, but also at the same time, I think on the other side, I think there are also steps that we could take to make our immigration policies better and more friendly for people who are wanting to legitimately, legally come to America and contribute, and not just looking for a free pass.
Yeah, I would say that was like the border specifically was one of the biggest hurdles for Harris to overcome in this election, because overwhelmingly the nation looks at the border situation and says like, this is broken. You know, a large portion of the country does not agree with the way, you know, Trump wants to paint the situation, but they would still objectively look at that and say like, hey, this isn't working. And regardless of how much say she actually had in it, you know, Harris was kind of put in this position where the country looked at her and said, like, "Oh, you're the border czar. Like, this was your job." And again, there's some debate as to how much control she actually had over that and what she was tasked with, but still, it's not a good look when the country is looking at you to fix the border, and in their eyes you've like that's the one task you had and you utterly failed at it.
You had
Like if
one
that's
job.
yeah, if that's the public perception, you like that's not good. That's not
Yeah.
good at all. um oh man, okay, so
So
we're
here's a question for you.
yeah.
So what about the Senate and the House? Because I think
Mhm.
there are a lot of really good reasons that we're looking at in terms of like why Kamala lost the election to Trump. But also, we have a swing now. The Senate is red,
Mhm.
and the House Republicans they're still not called yet. There's still a lot of districts that are finalizing their vote counts, and so that one hasn't been called yet. But it was already red, and looking at numbers so far, there's a red majority, and
Mhm.
by not a whole lot, but they're definitely closer. And so there's a potential that you have a Republican president, you have a Republican Senate, and a Republican House, which I don't
Yeah.
remember the last time that was the case. It's been a while since that was the case in my
I th
recollection. Maybe
I
not.
wanna say it was 2018, 20. I could be wrong. It was
Yeah.
I know that Trump had it during one portion of his,
Yes.
presidency.
So why do you think that that everything has just completely swung as far as we can tell, everything has swung red this election, not just with Kamala, but
Mhm.
also with Congress. Do you Why do you think that is, and how much do you think Kamala specifically played a part in causing people to vote more red for Congress as well?
I mean, when it comes to Congress and the House, so Congress, the House, the Senate, I don't necessarily know that that has much to do with Harris, to be honest. I think the reason why the country as a whole swung right, um, again, was because of dead messaging from the Democrats. It was just stale messaging, something that is not resonating with the American population. So, from my Democrat friends that I converse with like almost on a daily basis, once they kind of come to grips with the results of the elections, they were consistently lamenting how like this is like the reason why the Democrat Party lost this election and across the board is because of constant virtue signaling, because of pandering, because of
Mm,
gaslighting. Those are the sorts of issues. Like it's the social grandstanding that has just gone on consistently over the past 4 to 8 years that my Democrat friends were pointing out and saying like this is why they lost. This is why they can't get anything done. Is because they're too busy,
mm.
screaming through their bullhorns, things that just aren't resonating and aren't connecting with people. And so that's why I think the country swung right in the way that it did so overwhelmingly, is because they are not talking about things that the Americans care about.
Now, do you think that's a Democrat party issue, or do you think it's simply
100%.
it's those people who are in office from the Democrat party? How much of that do you think, like if they're replaced with another Democrat, how likely do you think it is
No,
that
I think
that
it's
person will do the
wholesale.
same thing?
I think like the entire living organism that is the Democrat ideology right now needs to be reformed if they want to have any sort of political future in this country, because
Mm,
what they've been pushing over the last 8 years is just not working anymore.
yeah.
And like they've shifted something I consistently hear from Democrats is that the Democrat Party has shifted so far left that I'm feeling more and more moderate or conservative. And not just like in the public sphere. I know people. I like. um, I hate to give like anecdotal personal examples, but I do actually know people who were like, "Yeah, I was a Democrat my whole life." And the party feels like that it's gone so far left that I feel like I'm on an island and I have nobody to represent me anymore. And so, like, when you do that, you lose a significant chunk of your voter base. And I would say that the Democrat Party has shifted so far left in a direction that is not working for them, that they've essentially squashed any chances of them really landing swing voters. So, another point that I think kind of hit home was that, the Democrats had a chance at reform back in the 2016 election with Bernie Sanders.
Yeah.
Now, election rigging, that's kind of a hot button subject. Everybody's always screaming it. But like when
Yeah.
we look at the primaries between Bernie and Hillary, like, come on. You can't tell me they didn't steal that from him. And I think Democrats are looking back at that now and saying, like, it got so messed up and we had a chance because that was the reform that, again, as an independent, as a moderate, um, with conservative leanings, I look back at that and say that's the reform that they needed. Now, granted, Bernie felt a little crazy at the time because of like a lot
Mhm.
of the socialist ideas, but there
Yeah.
were other things that he was pushing forward, like, hey, we've got to stop catering to these big money like mega donors and start listening to the people. Move toward a more populist messaging
Yeah.
in our platform, and they didn't do that. The Democrats decided to stick with the status quo and stick with the mega donors and the corporations and all of that stuff, and the people are rebelling now.
Yeah.
um, they're saying that doesn't work for me. Whereas you've got Trump on the other side, who his entire campaign is built on appealing toward the everyman. Famously has gone after who he is termed like the forgotten man, who feels like the government doesn't care about him, like the economy is leaving him behind, those sorts of things. When you build your campaign on that, that resonates.
Yeah.
um and so like I think the Democratic Party as a whole has completely failed, in terms of their messaging and their priorities, because they have gotten in bed with corporations and mega donors, and that's what they've hitched their wagon to, and they've lost sight of the people that they were supposed to be representing. And when you
Yeah.
do that, you just can't win an election.
Yeah. And it's crazy because the way that American politics was originally like designed, when our founding fathers put it into place, and their idea behind it was that the common person, they wanted it to be a government of, by, for the people, and their idea was that, hey, it's supposed to be a public service to be
Hmm.
in office. If you see something that you want to improve, or you see something that's wrong with your community, with your city, with your state, with the country, this is your way to contribute and to help make things better. You can run, you can get in office, help fix the things that need to be fixed, and then you go back home. You go back to your previous thing. You go back to your farm. You go back to your job, and because you did what you set out to accomplish. It was never supposed to be a career thing. Politics wasn't supposed to be something that you went to school for, or that you trained up for, and then you spent your entire life doing. It was supposed to be something that, hey, you know what? I'm tired of seeing this stuff operate the way it is, and I think I can make a difference. So I'm going to go and I'm going to do something about it. That's the way that politics in America was supposed to be. And I feel like, not to over like anything Trump, but that's literally what he did. That's literally what he's
Hmm.
doing. He's not a career politician. He's been very clear about that from the start, about the fact that he's like, I can't be bought. I'm rich. You can't buy me. I'm not going to succumb to bribes, to threats, because I already have everything that I need. There's nothing you can offer me to buy
Hmm.
me. And so this is who I am. This is what I see that's wrong. And this is what I want to fix. And that's my plan. And that's what I'm going to do if you elect me. That's exactly how American politics is supposed to be. And I feel like how you were talking, where he's talking to the forgotten person, to the everyday man. he sees that that's a thing. He sees that the government has been catering to the big corporations, to big business, to big money, and has been leaving the common person, leaving the everyday man behind. And so he goes, no, this needs to be a country that's built by, for the people, not for the corporations. And the fact that he's an economist helps a lot with that. But it, something
Trump's an
that I was wondering,
okay.
what?
Did you say Trump was an economist?
Or not an economist, sorry, businessman, sorry,
Yeah.
not an
Okay.
economist, sorry, my bad, wrong term. He's a rich guy, he's really good, he's made his money. Here's one thing that I was wondering, that I thought of: how likely do you think it is, that as a result of this election, and as a result of the last 4, 8, 12 years of the Democratic Party leaving people behind and going further and further and further left. Um, like you mentioned, there are people there. They're like, I feel like I'm left on an island.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking about like Robert Kennedy Jr. He was running initially on this platform. He was running in the Republican Party, but he was calling himself an old Democrat. He was like,
Yeah.
at least I think he was running Republican initially, because I think the Democrats rejected him as a candidate.
No, he was
Um,
running independent,
okay,
when he
that's
first
that's
started his campaign.
okay. He was running independent, and the thing that he kept talking about in his campaign initially was about how, like, hey, when my dad was in office, this is what being a Democrat meant, and so
Mhm.
I still identify more so as a Democrat, but not with what the Democratic Party currently today stands for. I stand for
Yeah.
what it meant back then. And so
I think
for those people who are they're like, well, I'm a Democrat, but I don't agree with how far left we are, but also I don't want to go to be a Republican. Do you think that we might end up getting a third party coming up for the next election in 4 years? Do you think there might be a third major party that
not
pops up
yet.
that's going to be between Republican and Democrat, or
No.
do you think they still need to go further left before that happens?
I don't I don't even necessarily see them going far left enough for there to ever be a third party,
Mm,
just because so we have a first past the post voting method here in the US, which essentially just means winner take all.
yeah.
Um, until we get ranked choice voting, third parties will always get killed in the elections. It's a two-party system, and it will continue to be so until we have like ranked choice voting or some other form of voting that enables third parties to gain some ground.
Mm,
Because consistently we see that the spoiler candidate is not given enough votes as they should receive because of the fear of allowing one candidate or the other into office. So until you can quell that fear for the voters, third party will just never be a realistic option. Um, but I do want to touch on that point, like with RFK Jr. Think about this, I guess, like public coalition that Trump has put together of former Democrats who are now on his team, so to speak. You
yeah.
have Joe Rogan, um, Elon Musk, RFK Jr., Tulsi Gabbard, among many, many others. Um, think about what that signifies in terms of like the kind of people that he is appealing to now that the Democrats just have not been able to kind of wrap their head around. Like, let's just say that, each of those people that I just listed off represents specific groups of very real people, everyday people within the country. That's why
Yeah.
Trump won this thing,
Hmm.
was because he got those middle ground voters who either were already swing voters or were old Democrats, and they're like, "Hey, I just don't identify with or resonate with what the Democratic Party has become,"
Yeah.
and they're voting for Trump. For various reasons. For a lot of them, it could be censorship. It could have been the response to the COVID pandemic, specifically in like, blue states, blue cities, whatever it may be. But like everything that has happened over the last like 4 to 8 years has a cumulative effect. Voters do have short memories, but you don't forget the feelings of how, specific administrations, whether county, city, state, or federal, how they make you feel with their policies. And
Yeah.
so I think the Democrats have been burying themselves in this political debt, so to speak, with the voters over the last several years. And a lot of people, just because, again, they don't resonate with the issues they care about, and they've just been digging themselves in a hole, and it's not been working, and this election was kind of that recompense for them.
Yeah.
Um, so, last thing before we kind of close on this, I want to like get into again our biblical Christian perspective on this election and
Yeah.
the results of all of this. Um, as a Christian, I didn't personally like. It didn't matter a ton to me who won. I did not. Little secret, I didn't vote for either one of them. Uh, I I left that part of my ballot blank. Now I absolutely had a candidate that I preferred in this election,
Yeah.
but to get my vote, it's you almost have to hit like a really high threshold. I have to
Yeah.
feel like yes, this candidate represents me,
Mhm.
um, and I just kind of left my ballot blank on this. But as a Christian, didn't matter too much to me personally who won, and I had I had some friends who were like very distraught with the results of the election. Um, I had other friends who were kind of like, rubbing it in, and I'm not a huge fan of that, to be honest.
Mm-mm.
I think like first and foremost, we're obviously called to be citizens of a kingdom
Yeah.
rather than a federal government. I think that's a large part of what got Christians persecuted and crucified and set on fire in the early days of Christianity was not pledging fealty to an empire but rather to a heavenly kingdom. And to me, no matter what happened, and despite whatever my preferences were, this didn't change anything for me.
Yeah.
I don't look at the country and say, like, "Good job, guys. You made the right move," or "How dare you guys? How could you let hate win?" Like that sort of thing. Uh, it was inconsequential to me in those regards. Um, Again, like conservative values, I am excited that um, we're going to keep more babies alive. Now, I empathize with a lot of the arguments for people who are like, "Hey, I am afraid of, what if I have a miscarriage and I can't, have a procedure done?" Those sorts of situations, or when it comes to like rape, incest. Granted, these are very low percentage occurrences
Yeah.
that I don't think it's good to make policy the law of the land for low instance occurrences.
Yeah.
Generally, you carve out exceptions in the law for that.
Right.
I think
Which,
that's
by
the
the way,
best way
everyone,
to go
there
about.
we do have an episode where we talked a lot about this stuff, where Lee was on here and we were talking
Hmm.
about different solutions to this problem as well when it comes to the foster system, adoption system, things like that. So hey, if you haven't checked out that episode, I think it was our second episode since our like kind of our relaunch. So make sure you go back through our past videos. Go check out that episode because there's a lot of really good content in there. Because we could talk for a long time about
Yeah.
that, but we actually already did. So go check that out
Hmm.
as well. All right, keep going, Tyler.
Yeah. So it's like, I'm excited to see, more babies get to live
Yeah,
from that standpoint. And, the economy, I do, um, I do believe more in the economic plan under Trump than I did under whatever Harris's economic plan was going to be. I never really found out from her. Um, but I know that I didn't like how my wallet and my bank account were feeling under the current administration. But again, I was agnostic to all of it essentially,
Yeah,
and not to say that my response is the way that all Christians should feel, but I do believe that the Bible teaches that we are subject to one ruler and to one king,
yeah,
and they're not here on earth. And so I think if you had extremely like strong reactions one way or the other, it could signify that your heart is maybe in the wrong place as a Christian.
maybe just a little.
Maybe. Maybe
Who are
just a
you putting
little.
your trust in?
Um yeah. And so, like, especially if after the election you just feel like distraught. Now, hypothetical, it could have gone the other way. If you would have been distraught if Harris had won, same thing.
Yep.
Like, if it would have ruined your day, ruined your night, I think, like, where's your heart and where's your trust in the Lord? Obviously, we're all going to have preferences. We're all going to have things that, we think should happen. Um, But at the end of the day, where's our heart? Where's our trust? Where are we getting fulfillment? And it should never be the government.
Yeah.
Um, and I say that as somebody who loves politics. Like I eat this stuff up. Since I was a kid, I was reading books about the presidents and the government. So like I'm heavily invested in a lot of this, but not from like an emotional spiritual standpoint to where like this kind of governs my life, if you will.
Yeah.
um I think Dave Ramsey, I'm just going to paraphrase here, but he often talks about how like the things that happen at your dinner table are far more important to your success than what happens in the White House.
Hmm.
And he's absolutely right. Like, how are we
Yeah.
conducting ourselves with our family, and in our prayer life and in our study life, and how we're communing with the people around us? Like, that's far more important to your individual success and health and well-being than whatever happens up in Washington. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. Well said. Well said. I completely agree. There's this aspect where like, yeah, uh, I'm glad for where we're gonna be in January. But also at the same time, like Lee actually said something that was really good. He posted on social media on November 5th on election day. He posted in the morning and he said, "Hey, Christian, regardless of who wins today, whether your candidate wins or not, nothing changes for you. Your call is
mhm,
to put on Christ
yeah,
regardless." And just like you were saying, I feel like if you are ecstatic and you're going around putting it in everyone's face and about how your candidate won, I'm sorry, you're wrong. If you're going around and you are just completely devastated because your candidate lost, you're also wrong. Both sides of that are wrong. Both extremes are wrong because ultimately the question is, where are we putting our hope? Where are we
mhm,
putting our trust? I don't remember exactly where it is in the Bible, but it talks about some put their trust in chariots, some put their trust in horses, some put their trust in their armies, their wealth. But we trust in the name of the Lord our God.
yeah,
That ultimately is who we should be looking to. That ultimately is who we should be putting our trust in, regardless of who's in the White House or who's not in the White House, and how much we do or we don't agree with what they're going to do. Um, yes, my preferred candidate got elected, but you know what? Here's the thing: I vote when I vote, I vote for who I think is going to do the job better.
mhm,
And for me, there was I will say keeping babies alive was a significant impact for me. And
mhm,
while I know that both candidates, to an extent, are pro-choice, I understand that. At the same time, I know that one candidate was going to push for more pro-choice moves to be made, and the other candidate was going to say, no, we're leaving it up to the states to decide, and that's that. We're not going to make legislation on a federal level. Would I like there to be legislation on a federal level in favor of saving babies? Yeah, I would.
Mm-hmm.
But in this case, I look at it and I go, okay, well, neither candidate's going to do that. And so for me, it was, all right, which one is going to be less gung-ho about pushing it the other direction?
Yeah.
But with that, I also understand, frankly, I don't know much about Harris's personal life. I don't know really much about like who she is as a person. I'm not that big a fan of who Trump is as a person. There's a lot of stuff in his life that I disagree with.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, I'm not voting for him to be president because I agree with how he spends his nights and weekends. I'm voting for him for president because of the job that I think he's going to do. And that's the important thing, is I'm looking at it going, okay, I saw what he did his first term. I saw that he did what he said he was going to do. And so I was going for, hey, we know what kind of a job he does, and I'm hiring you for a job, not for your personality. And so that for me was kind of was a big part of that as well. But ultimately, it does come down to, hey, as a Christian, as someone who claims to follow Jesus, how do we love people and lead people to Jesus? How do we lead people to Christ? Is your reaction to this election, whether positive or negative, helping draw people closer to Christ? Or is it pushing people away, whether because you are exhibiting fear and anxiety, or whether it's because you're rubbing it in people's faces and you're being a jerk?
Yeah, I would say my closing points are two things here. Obviously, most Christians tend conservative. My caution to you, my warning to you, do not idolize Trump. Many Christians have already, gotten on board with that, thankfully. But also don't idolize any, political party or ideology as well, because I think oftentimes we saw in the Bible, Jesus typically chose a third option.
Yep.
And my second point on top of that is we are called to be peacemakers. So if there are political discussions going on in your friend groups, in your family, in your office spaces, you are called to be a peacemaker. I have, again, strong political feelings about a lot of things, like just because I love political science, like the study of this all. But when I'm in a group of people, I feel as a Christian that my job is to bring peace and try and bring understanding between people and kind of bridge the gap. I think that's what us Christians are called to do in terms of our involvement in the political sphere. Like, yes, vote your values, vote your convictions, but also when it comes to the public political scene, make peace with people.
Yep.
Because especially in a time like right now, where as common of a talking point as it is, we are more divided than ever. It is true politically. The shared values in our country have splintered so far apart. People are very, what's the word I'm looking for? There's so much animosity between people nowadays when the subject of politics comes up. And the Christian's job right now is to make peace in those situations. Like that is a mandate
That's right.
for Christians. And so those would be my closing points. But
Absolutely. Well said. Well, thank you all once again for joining us. That is our show for today. We hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like, follow, subscribe to the channel, throw some comments down there. Let us know your thoughts. Let us know what you think. Where do you stand on all of this? How can you live out your Christian faith in the world of politics with your friend group? And also rate the show wherever you might be listening or watching, because that really helps out a lot. That we appreciate the interaction. It helps out the algorithm. Also, don't forget, we do have a Discord channel as well. We have a Discord channel, The Frame. I believe the link is down in the description. if you have some thoughts on the show, go join that. If there are topics that you want us to talk about, that you would like us to hit on, what's near and dear to your heart, what are the things that you care about, drop that in there. We'd love to hear from you, because we're not just here to just talk ourselves. We want to know what you guys want to hear about and what kind of things you guys actually care about, so that way we can also discuss those from that same biblical frame of mind as well. So with that, we appreciate y'all. We love you, and we will see you next time.